All right, so I'm going to share my screen. Just let me know if you can see it. All right, you guys see my screen? Good, sweet, awesome. So I don't know if I can see you guys if I'm in presentation mode. I want to see your faces. Let's see if it works. Maybe it won't. Okay. Oh, I can see you guys. Awesome. So we're going to go over 5 different assessment tips to prevent dance injuries. This is going to be kind of like a part 1 with 2 more parts that I have in my brain afterwards that we'll review. So first of all, who am I? I am Christina. Hello. Even though I think my thing says Ryan Obenesser. That's not him. I'm Christina. So I have a master's in clinical nutrition. I have a CFC, which is a certified strength and conditioning specialist, as well as a BA in dance and exercise physiology from Brockport. Brockport, represent, Meg. And then I have my master's in clinical nutrition from NYCC. I own OB Training and Sports Performance, which is local. So we are located in Utica, New York. It is a training facility mostly for adults. Director of Dance with Utica, which we unfortunately had to cancel this year. I love everything related to dance, health, fitness, nutrition, helping people, love it all. That's really what drives me. And I love dogs. Fun fact, love dogs. So overview of what we are going to go through today. So the 5, and this is by no means an exhaustive list at all. So the 5 things, 5 tips, assessment tools that we're gonna go over today is standing posture, an overhead squat, hops in a single leg position, a dead bug, and a airplane test. And we're gonna go into in-depth of each of those and really what we're looking for and what that can mean for dancers. And if you do want to stand up and do these as we go through them, you're more than welcome to. So first of all, posture. I know it sounds probably pretty basic, but it's so important to look at posture both in a parallel and turned out position. We're to go through just the standing posture first, just to see what that looks like. Let me move you guys because I can't see here. So the first one, there we go. First one, we're just looking at the skeleton here, and you can see the different curvatures of the spine. So the first one is a kyphotic and lordosis position. So the top portion here, you can see it's really rounded. It's easy to kind of think of like an older, like your grandma type of position here. It's that hunched over look. Some dancers have that. Mostly that happens as you do get older. What we do see is the lordosis portion of it, which we're gonna get into. That's actually the purple one, but that's when you just have an excess of a curvature in the lower back. So that's one type of standing posture. The red one here is the ideal one. So this is what we want to see. So a lot of times you hear people talk about plumb line, especially if like you're in a balance or you're doing a turn or something like that. You might hear your teacher or you guys might cue that you want to have a straight, up and down plumb line, and that's what people mean when they say that. If you can follow this dotted line, it goes right down the ears, goes right over the shoulder, right down through the torso, through the center of the pelvis, through the knees, and then out through the center of the heel. That's ideally what we're looking for. The purple one is the lordosis. So that is that anterior tilt of the pelvis. So if you can see the pelvis here, the way I like to think of a pelvis is kind of like a bucket filled with water. If you tip the bucket forward, the water will spill out the front. That is called an anterior tilted pelvis. We see that pretty frequently in dancers, especially when they do move into that turned out position. They'll kind of stick out their butt, and so they can try to get like that, that 180 degree turn out. This is also where a lot of back pain issues are going to come from. And then the sway back and the flat back, I would say you don't, well, you might see the sway back as far as people that are like super hyperextended. You'll kind of see like they'll have a little bit of a rounded back, and then they'll throw their hips forward, excuse me, and then they'll lock out the back of their knees. You might see this position pretty frequently, actually. And then a flat back where there isn't much curvature of the spine at all. We do want, going back to that ideal spine, we do want curvature. The curvature of the spine is natural. We just want to make sure that nothing, ideally, nothing is over exaggerated. So this is just overall review of this spine. Moving that into what that looks like for a dancer. So sometimes it's easy to look at the bones, but then when you actually go to put it into, sorry, let me just put this one person in. Then when you actually go and put it into like practicality, we're not quite sure what we're looking at. So this again is that lordosis, where they're sticking that butt out. They might have that back pain. This is a lot of times what happens, like I said before, when the dancers move into that turned out position, is they'll compensate in the lower back by sticking out their butt to get the feet into a more turned out position. This is what a neutral spine will look like on a dancer, and then this is what that tucking will look like as well. So moving into just speaking of the lordosis, so the far left position. So as we talked about before, it's going to be that anterior tilted pelvis. So you can see here, if you can picture that pelvis, and you can picture that pelvis as a bucket, the bucket is dipping forward so that it'd be water coming out the front in that anterior tilted position. You might see the knees hyperextended, or the dancers might be locked out into those knees. They are to have that lower back pain. So maybe they're constantly talking about their back aches, doing pretty much honestly anything, especially with a lot more acro and stuff like that now. Thrown into pieces, competition pieces or whatever, that's like where all of the pressure will go. This person is going to have weak and tight hip flexors. So you can see where my cursor is here, right in the crease of the hips, it's gonna be tight, right? So you can kind of see that divot. That's because the muscles of the hip flexors are literally constantly in a contracted position, and they might not have the ability to lengthen through the front of those hips to get into that neutral position that we're looking for. They're also most likely going to have tight erector spinae. So erector spinae, if you could literally picture your spine, there are muscles that run up and down the sides of the spine called your erector spinae. And you can kind of see it here, right? Because there's such a curvature, that lordosis, that those muscles are always on fire, right? They're always firing. So they're going to have really tight muscles there as well. They're going to have weak abdominals. So you can see they're just kind of what I like to call just dumping into their abs are just kind of not contracting at all. And then their glutes and their hamstrings, again, because they're always kind of sticking out their butt, they're not utilizing their hamstrings and their glutes as they should be. So that's going to not be helpful for some dance positions. Going into the tucking and the sway back, so now we're on the far right hand position. So with this, it's kind of going to be an opposite effect, right? So one was sticking out their butt, the other one is completely tucked underneath. So now again, picturing the pelvis, picturing that bucket, and now the bucket is tucked backward. So the pubic bone is forward and the water is now coming out the back. So it's going to be that posterior tilt position. You also might see here, though, hyperextended legs too. People might just lock right into that position. You are definitely going to see hyperextension at the hip joint. So because their pelvis is pushed forward, they're going to have the lengthened hip flexors. So they might have, because it's lengthened, they might not have the strength and the stability in the front of the hip. And then because their pelvis is literally always tucked under, their glutes and their hamstrings might just be overworked. So those might be kind of tight. You might see maybe some like psoas or glute med issues and stuff there as well. So you basically want to just look at the dancer first and not really say much. Dancers are really great at taking cues. So if you do say something, or if they know that you're looking for something, they might correct it and act like it's natural, but it's not. So you just want to kind of assess it almost not letting them know you're assessing it. So do take a look as they even just like come into your room, as they're talking to their friends. That's a good time to kind of look at what their actual posture is. Because then when you do ask them to just stand, they'll be like, oh yes, like I always stand in this position. It's like, no, you don't. But, and then again, like I said, do look to see what happens when the dancer does move into a turned out position, because they might be neutral and parallel, but then they might move into that lordotic position once they do go into that turned out position, because they want to try to get as much turnout as possible. Any of that? Any questions on that stuff yet? Let me know if anything's over your head or if we're doing good so far. Okay, so number 2, moving into a little bit some more movement patterns. The first one is the overhead squat. So the overhead squat is a functional movement screen called an FMS. This is just one piece of it. So what this is it's basically an overhead squat. You don't have to have, this is literally like the FMS tools and stuff. You don't have to have that. You can literally put your feet up like on a couple magazines or something like that. But what the movement is first you're just going to stand with your feet hip distance apart, and you're going to hold your hands overhead. You can grab a bar or a stick or a broomstick or something. You're going to bring it overhead, and you're going to ask the dancer just to squat down and see what that looks like. And then things that we're looking for here is if they do lift the heels, pretend that this gray beam isn't there yet, their heels are on the floor. But if they go down into the squat, and the only way they can get down into the squat is if they lift up their heels, you want to take a look at their knees, see if their knees start to cave in. I call it the melting candle, like everything just kind of like comes inward. You want to see what happens in their pelvis and in their hips. Is it goes straight down? Does it stick way, way, way back? What's happening in their upper back? Is it rounded? Is it super, super bendy here? Is it a straight line? Looking at the biceps in line with the ears, can they actually get the hands into this position, or are the hands more out way in front of them and they can't actually get into that upright position? Based on what happens there, if they do have any of those compensations, as I said, heels lifting off, knees cave in, they can't keep their chest up, anything like that, then you would want to elevate them. And you would just put, like, this is like about a 2-inch box. Like I said, you can put some magazines, or if you have like a weight or something, a couple books, you would elevate their heels, and then you would have them do the same exact movement pattern. And if they were able to do what you asked for with this elevated position, we now know that there's a few things going on, and we're going to talk about that right here of what this is actually testing and looking for. So first, the test is, it's looking at extremity mobility, postural control, pelvic and core stability, basically looking for everything. We are looking at bilateral, so we are looking at 2 legs. If there is symmetry or asymmetry between each side, so if you do see maybe one knee that caves in and the other one doesn't. We're looking for mobility and stability of the hips, the knees, the ankles, as well as the scapula and the thoracic mobility. So basically that means upper back. And then what can you gather from this? So like I said, if the heels come off the floor, if the knees cave in, if the hips are way back or maybe they're tucked under, if there's an arch or a kyphotic position in the upper back, if they can't get the arms overhead, all of those things are telling us different things. So limited mobility in the upper back can attribute to the poor glenohumeral or thoracic spine mobility, or both. So what that means is if they do have a rounded upper back, or if they can't get the biceps in line with the ears here, then we know that there is some either tightness or mobility issue in the thoracic spine, the upper back, and there are exercises that we can do to help open up that. In the hips, if someone is super, super tight in the hips, the only way that they can get lower is if they do lift the heels. So if we do see the heel lift, that means that there's potentially some tightness in the hips that, again, maybe needs some mobility or some flexibility exercises. And a heel lift could also mean that they have tight Achilles and that they don't have the range of motion at the ankle joint to get into that depth of a squat. So how does all of that relate to dance? So you can think probably of just pretty simple dance movements that you need the upper back for, right? So if you have a tight upper back or a super mobile back, then a cambray, anything moving into the back space, back bends, back walkovers, posture is going to look a little bit different, or they might have issues getting into that back space. So if someone does have a super rounded back, or they can't get their hands, their biceps in line with their ear in this overhead position, then asking them to do a cambray, you might not see much movement. And instead of just saying, go back further, or maybe the dancer is complaining of back pain, well, now you know, okay, they have a tight upper back. That's probably contributing to the back pain or the limited mobility to get into the back space. Let's do X, Y, and Z exercises, whether it's strength training or mobility or flexibility, to increase that movement so we can eventually get the hands into that position so their cambray, stuff like that, has more range of motion. If they do have lack of pelvic control, so basically anything in their core or their trunk, if their back is super, super arched, if they just drop down and you see a lot of movement, I can swear on here, right? Ass, I'm gonna say ass, okay? We call it like ass to grass in the strength training world, kind of where like you butt wink down here at the bottom. So sometimes dancers do have the flexibility to get so low that their pelvis kind of does this little like wink at the bottom. It tucks underneath, so that they don't have the control. They have the flexibility and the mobility, but they don't necessarily have the strength and control of their pelvis, which can translate into balance being off, them not being able to execute turns, core control basically for any possible movement. Looking at the ankle joint, so dorsiflexion. Dorsiflexion is going to be like when you're plie-ing, it's increasing this angle here right at the front of the shoelace. You want to make sure, some dancers have super, super long Achilles, and those are the people that you see have really, really deep plies. Other people have very tight calves and tight Achilles, and they can't get a huge ankle range of motion here, which is going to affect their plie depth, especially when you talk about jumps, the depth and the power of the plie, landing and taking off from jumps. That's going to take a lot into account. You know, you never want a dancer to blow an Achilles out. You don't want anyone to blow an Achilles out. But you do want to make sure that those things are looked at, because if you do have a dancer that has super, super tight calves or Achilles, and their heels are never touching the floor on their plies when they're landing from their jumps, and you're having them do a quick anything or just repetitive things, or maybe you have a dance that has a ton of jumping in it, well, you know, you're basically over time potentially going to have that dancer tear something or injure something. And also you want to take a look at now what happens once they do go onto one leg. So yes, dancers for the most part, we're generally either going from two legs to one leg or always moving onto one leg. So you do want to take into account what happens, which we'll get into in just a second, of what happens when they do put all of their weight onto one leg. If this overhead squat movement pattern looks good and they nail all the things that we're looking for, and then when they move to a single leg and like all hell breaks loose, then you know that there could be some stability or motor control issues, because it was fine when they were on two legs, but then translating to one leg, everything kind of got messy. So that's also something that you do need to take into consideration and see what happens when they go from two legs to one leg. Speaking of one leg, so this is a fun test. If anyone has followed me on Instagram or Facebook over the past couple of years, you might have seen some videos I saw my dancers doing this when I was doing more strength training at the actual gym. Hops or single leg sautés. So with this test, over on the right-hand side, you can see this woman here. So this is the position that I asked the dancers to start in. And then underneath their foot, you know, either like put a sticker on the floor or an X on the floor. Or I used to use like small hoops, like a hula hoop or something, and have them stand inside of it. Hands are on their hips, and then they're just in a parallel passe position. And then from here, I would ask them to jump. and I want them to try to stay inside of the hoop or stay on that X that they have as I look at all of these things on the left-hand side. So what are we looking for here? Looking for dynamic trunk and pelvic control. So dynamic because they're jumping. This is actually going to be hops. So I want to see what is happening. Are they doing what I call the dead fish, where like they're kind of like crumping, I guess you could call it, like their ribs are splayed open and their back arches, they look like a dead fish flying through the air? Does that start to happen? Are they kind of hiking their hips? So as they're jumping, is the leg that's in that passe hiking up and down as they do that? Looking at the lower extremity. So yes, we just talked about the hips as far as they're hiking. What's happening at the knee? So that landing leg, is the knee falling inwards? Are they not able to maintain a parallel position? What's happening at the ankle? Can they not point the toe and then land toe ball heel, which is the next one? Is their ankle, their heel never touching the floor? Those are all things to take into consideration. This one, it can get pretty messy, especially with younger dancers, because they generally don't have a ton of control yet. What I call is of a passing score is if they do 8 out of the 16, so half of the jumps correctly, meaning that they're able to maintain that pelvic neutral control. There's no hip hike. They're landing toe ball heel. Their hips are even. Their knees are staying right over that second toe. They're able to point their toe and then land toe ball heel, and they've landed on the X or in the hula hoop 8 out of the 16 times. This tells you a lot. Like I said, if that squat looks good and then you move into this one and this looks like trash, we know we have a lot to work on as far as stability pretty much in the trunk area. So the core and the hips are going to need a lot of work. This one's a fun one. You want to make sure that you obviously do both sides and that just grade it as you go. You can just like write it on a sheet of paper. So those are your single leg saute hops. Number 4, super simple, but it's not simple. The dead bug. You guys maybe have heard of this exercise before. It is a great core and pelvic stability. It's an exercise, but I like to use it as a test, that or like a double leg raise, which I can go over in just a second. So this is going to tell me a lot about the pelvis and the core, like I said. So if you have someone that's already in that anterior tilted position, again, so it's that dancer that has that lordosis, their pelvis, again, that bucket of water is tilted forward, so the water is kind of coming out their belly button. Their butt is sticking out, and then you translate that from a standing position onto the floor, they're going to have a big arch right into their lower back. Your spine does have that natural curvature, but what I say is we want to keep it natural. We don't want the Lincoln Tunnel. So I don't want that back to excessively come off the floor. I don't want to be able to slide my hand underneath their lower back. A lot of times what I'll do in this position is they'll actually start with both knees up at 90 degrees. So they're flexed at 90 degrees in the hip like this. Their shins are parallel to the floor. And then generally I'll just have their hands, both hands straight to the ceiling, and they're just going to hold that position to start. And already sometimes in that position, the dancer won't be able to get their lower back to get into that neutral position. They'll have this big arch in the lower back, and they won't be able to maintain the neutral position. If that's the case, you're not going any further in the tests. You already know that literally just holding a dead bug position is going to be more than enough for them, so they can start to get really those deep transverse abdominis muscles, pelvic floor muscles firing in that position. If they look okay in that position, then you can start to move. So I like to start with opposite arm as leg. Actually, this is not, I took this picture off Google. This is not exactly how I would do it. There's many variations of the dead bug exercise, but I would start with the opposite arm as leg. So taking the pelvis, right, looking at the 2 hip points. So I like to think of the 2 bony points at the front of the hips. If you palpate them, if you feel them, I always like to think of those as car headlights. I always want them facing straight to the ceiling. As the dancer starts to extend this leg out or move further away from you, think of it like a lever system, right? So if you're going to shovel, a bunch of snow, because it's going to be coming soon, and you're at the far, far, far end of the shovel, and you try to pick up a huge piece of snow, it's going to be super hard, right? If you get lower down on the shovel, then it's easier to do it. It works the same exact way. The further out from center, which is your core, you get, the more difficult the exercise is going to be. So as the dancer starts to extend that leg, if you start to see any sort of movement in the pelvis, that's what we're taking note of here. That's what we're looking for. So we're looking to see if the dancer starts in neutral pelvis, but as they extend this leg out, it turns into an anterior tilt, meaning you see more space underneath that lower back. And if you cue them and they can't keep their lower back to the floor, then again, you know that there's going to need some work, some core stability work, some pelvic stability work, working on the dead bug, or some core exercises, because they don't have the ability to control that. This dancer might have back pain. This dancer might have a really hard time balancing, doing any sort of turns, right? You can just kind of probably envision a dancer or yourself that trying to turn with like their chest out and the butt out, it's not gonna fly too well. So this exercise is learning how to get that pelvis back into a neutral position and actually control the pelvis. Is going to be super helpful. You can also take this into a leg raise. So this would be if both legs were straight up to the ceiling and you had your hands flat on the floor. They're going to take those legs and they're going to lower both legs as low as they can before that lower back starts to pop off the floor. And they don't go any lower than that. And you can kind of eyeball where that is. It might be at 45 degrees. It might be able to get lower, and you can just note that. And then you can always go back, and that's something that you can retest to see at what point, what degree did they get. Are they able to now keep their pelvis in a more neutral position for longer? Then you know that their core is getting stronger and they're able to have more pelvic stability and more control as well. Ideally, as your core gets more stable and you get more strength in it, that back pain is going to dissipate. We also do need to work on the glutes and the hamstrings, but that's for a different conversation. You also want to make sure that you're taking a look at their rib cage and making sure that their ribs aren't splayed. You want them to be able to knit their rib cage together, kind of like thinking like they're wearing a corset. It's keeping that core and those ribs also knitted down as they move their limbs. Adding hands, so reaching the hands back like this woman in the picture is. You can do one leg, you can do two leg. There's many ways to progress or regress it, depending upon kind of what you're seeing, how the dancer is taking your cues with that as well. The biggest thing is really looking at that lower back, because that's going to tell you what's happening in the pelvis. And then last but not least is our airplane test. So the airplane test is a pretty advanced movement. It tests almost everything. You're going to tell a lot about this movement. So what the airplane test is, first of all, is you're starting, this woman on the left-hand side here, you're starting in this tabletop position. So you want the ankle and the foot in line with the knee, in line with the hips, in line with the ribs, in line with the shoulders, in line with the head. And you want to try to maintain this position as you start to plie this bottom leg, and both hands are going to reach right in front of her eyesight. So leg stays up in line with the head, you plie the bottom leg, you reach the hands to the floor, and then you come back up into this airplane T position. So that's what the test is. That's what the airplane test is. Like I said, it is an advanced movement, and there takes a lot of neuromuscular control of the lower extremities here. So what we are looking for, as I said, we are looking for that head to maintain alignment with the toe. A lot of times what you'll see is the dancer is unable to keep the foot in line with the head, or it maybe like flies out to the side. They can't keep it. If you were looking head on at this woman, their leg would be way out to the side. You want to make sure that you are looking at the pelvis. So again, those two bony points that I was talking about at the front of the pelvis, you want to make sure that they are facing the floor. The leg that is extended and up a lot of times this will start to go into a turnout position. I like to see what they do kind of on their own first. And then if I cue them and they can maintain it, then I know they just needed a little bit more clarification. But if I cue it and they're unable to maintain that, then I know that there's some stuff that we need to work on. From a front angle, you want to check out the knee. So is the knee, and hip internal external rotation, sorry, right? As well, like I said, you don't want the hip to open, keep everything square. You can also look to see what's happening at the kneecap as well. We want the kneecap facing the floor, not opening up to the side, because we need to maintain that parallel position. And then knee valgus, so looking at the knee from a head-on position. Knee valgus basically means that it's that melting candle that I was talking about earlier, where the knee is dropping inwards towards the midline. Where if you dropped a line down from the knee, it would be on the inside of the big toe. We don't want that position. That's going to tell us a lot about, especially once we start getting into jump training, if they don't have the strength within the hip and the core to control what's happening at the knee. You're going to have potentially some ACL injuries, and just some stuff that we could potentially, avoid, because we don't want that. So we want to make sure that the knee is tracking right over, I like to say, about the second toe. You can kind of eyeball that. Sometimes people even draw a line, literally like a water erase marker or something, draw a line right on the dancer. And then also checking out what's happening at the ankle and the foot. So are they overpronating or supinating, anything like that at the foot? Do they have all of the weight on the inside of the foot and they're kind of collapsing that arch and putting all the weight into the big toe? Can they wiggle the toes? You want to make sure that they are not pushing all the weight into their feet, that they're able to maintain most of the weight through the heel. And then as they're straightening back up, what's happening in the leg again? Are they able to maintain that same track as they come back up? Are they locking into hyperextension, looking at that lower back, right? So this, if you looked at this at a side view, it's posture. That's all we're looking at. We're looking at the spinal alignment, the bony alignment, just in a different plane. That's it. And then for this, a pass would be a 4 out of 5. Meaning, again, going through the what we're looking for, they were able to maintain toe to head, parallel, neutral, core control, no knee valgus, no overpronation. They were able to reach down to the floor and come back up into that airplane position properly 4 out of the 5 times. And obviously, you do need to test left and right, because we know dancers mostly left side, right? We don't want to do things on the left. We got to see, because that's where all the asymmetries come in hand. Especially if, I know a lot of times dancers in dance classes might only have time to do something on the right, or you'll just say like, or maybe you're choreographing something or you're in competition, you always say do something on the right, because that's your good side and that's the side that you're going to score, or you don't have time to go through the left side in class. You're going to see a lot of asymmetries here. These are just a handful of assessments, just literally the tip of the iceberg. There are so many other ones, but I think that these give us just a really great overall picture, only using 5 assessments, which is helpful. The less, the better, in my opinion. So what steps do you take? So first thing, as we just talked about, is the assessment. It's identifying weaknesses, identifying strengths, identifying asymmetries, and then ideally creating a strength training program based off of those findings. So there's no sense in creating a program or doing something that is already your strong suit, because you're only making that stronger and you're just basically making your weaknesses, you're widening the gap in between that, or asymmetries. We want to be as symmetrical as possible. And that's where finding a strength training program or having a strength training program created for you is very beneficial. And which leads into the strength training, right? So you want to have a cross-training program, cross-training, so it's something that you're doing outside of dance class. It can happen in the dance studio, that is fine. Purpose of that is to create the stability and the control of the entire body. We need a balance of strength and mobility and flexibility. If you are very strong, but you don't have the mobility or the flexibility, there's potential to get injured. If you are too flexible and too mobile and you don't have the strength, then you can also get injured. So we want to try to find a balance of having that strength and that mobility and flexibility. You also want to be mindful of appropriate times to overload and not, depending upon what your dance seasons are. So, you know, going into a cross training class 3 to 4 times a week at the peak of your competition season or performance season or college auditions, whatever it is probably not the smartest idea. You do want to work with someone that will be able to taper the program depending upon if you're in season, off season, auditioning, whatever it is, because then you might get injured because you're doing too much. And then that mobility, flexibility, again, like I said, it's a combination of having the strength and the mobility and flexibility. You want to be mobile and flexible. There are differences between mobility and flexibility, so you want to make sure that we are trying to maintain as healthy range of motion of the muscles and the joints and determine if it's a flexibility issue or a mobility issue. We'll save that for another day, and then address accordingly with that. And then incorporating that into the strength training program is kind of kills 2 birds with 1 stone, and they're complementary as well. So if you are having a mobility issue, then the strength exercise might be difficult, but if you pair them together, that's actually your best option, because then you can get into the position because you're mobile and you can do it properly because now you're strong. So from here, if anyone is interested in finding out what those next steps are, anyone that is listening to this today will get 20% off of the next steps, which is a step-by-step guide of the exercises for strengthening flexibility and mobility. So basically going through those 5 assessments, we identified what to look for, but the next step is now, okay, I know what to look for, but now what do I do to actually correct these things that I'm seeing? So I will have a guide on how to do those, how to execute them, what exercises to do. That way you can implement them into class of your dancers. Maybe you can give them homework assignments. If you're a dancer, you can implement them on your own, and you can immediately start to work on them. So if anyone's interested in that, let me know. I'll let you know when I do have that ready. I'm still in the works of doing it. We will receive it for $80 versus $100 at 20% off. Other than that, I'll open the floor to questions in just a second, but I love questions. If you don't feel comfortable doing any questions here, feel free to send me an email, Facebook, Instagram, whatever works. And then if, we made it just to the end before he barked. Cooper. Just made it, you guys. That's Cooper, my little one. He looks like a cow. I do plan on doing more of these. Hopefully they can be in person, but I think Zoom is awesome too, because I know Deb's in Florida. Someone signed up from Hungary, which is awesome, so she can listen to that later. But if you wouldn't mind leaving a review on Facebook or Instagram, just so people can kind of like understand what this is and if it was beneficial for you, instead of hearing it from me, because I think it's awesome, but All right, other than that, you guys, I will open up the floor. If you have any questions, let me know. I can go back and review anything. I don't know if I have a chat button here. We can go back and here are the 4 if you want to write, or the 5.
Can I just talk to you instead of typing in?
Yeah. Go right ahead.
Okay. Well, first of all, how do we order this? Do we order it through Dance of Utica?
It will be up. I'm still putting the finishing touches on it. So I will send out an email. I have everyone's email. So I'll send out an email when that is actually ready. And then if that's something that you want to purchase, you can let me know through email.
Okay. And I wanted to ask about when they're doing the squatting exercise, and if a student has like very, very tight calves and in the Achilles area, they literally don't even have a demi-plie. If you continue to work on the stretching of that, I guess it's like, I'm trying to say, how much can you push them without really causing an injury? You know what I mean? Because they're really tight and they barely can even demi-plie.
Yeah. So that's going to depend upon kind of getting back into if it's a flexibility or a mobility issue, or even a bony issue. So you have to ask the dancer if they're feeling any sort of pain or pinching.
Right.
Then it might literally be like that their bones, just the way that their bones are formed, that they're literally meeting, and there's nothing you can do about that. To verify that, you could have them go get an X-ray or an MRI to see if that is the case, because they might be having literally their bones are pinching together. So you always want to be in contact with the dancer and asking them how they're feeling. If it's pain, like is it muscular pain? Are you in pain? Like you don't want to move through pain. But sometimes flexibility, or I guess I should say stretching, isn't the answer. It's mobility and gaining more range of motion at the ankle joint. So that would be some mobility issues, and that you could address with some ankle mobility exercises.
Okay, and then the opposite of that also, where, the dancer, they're hypermobile, which actually causes weakness in their ankles. They have such a high releve, but the stability of their ankles is so poor that it's scary that they're gonna, fall off their ankle.
Yeah.
So is that primarily calf? We use the TheraBand exercises,
Yep.
point size of all that, but okay, but so is that, and then, you do your releves and plie and your regular releves to get all parts of the calf muscle, but if you still feel like they're not, they have that side to side weakness.
They look like Bambi legs on like point shoes, right?
Yeah, well, yeah,
oh
you're always afraid they're gonna fall.
Yeah, and that is where, as I mentioned a little bit later, is that it's that fine balance between someone that's hyper mobile and doesn't have the strength and stability, then you're going to get injured. Also, someone that is super tight and doesn't have the flexibility and mobility, you're also going to get injured. So it is finding that balance. TheraBand work is great. I do like to load my dancers. It could be with bands, it could be with weights, because that also is going to take kind of like learn that movement pattern, and that'll also create some stability at the ankle joint as well. But working with, releve, calf raises, TheraBand exercises where you're, sickling and winging it, point and flex, calf raises off a stair. You can work with different tempos, like eccentric. There's different types of contractions. So playing with tempos on the eccentric and the concentric contractions is helpful as well. But really, a lot of it comes down to the hips, the hip stability, like through the glutes and the hip flexors. The core, so much stems from there to start with.
Yes, and they start, like, I feel like I can get my dancers to start in the correct position with the deep turnout muscles actually engaged, but then the minute they go to plie, it goes away.
Yeah.
It's like they're putting their knees sideways, but you can see their hips their legs are not rotating in the hip side. You can just see it. They're dropping in. So
I recommend everyone have a TheraBand in their dance bag or a mini band. Warming up with clamshells, with straight leg raises, fire hydrants, glute bridges. That's going to start to activate the rotators, frog, laying on your back with your feet together and kind of like pressing your hips up. It's called a frog hip bridge. It's just going to start to activate the external rotators, the glutes and the glute medius that we're looking for to support that rotation.
Are you will some of those, I recognize some of what you're saying, are those going to be the kinds of exercises you're going to put in your information?
Yes, absolutely. Any other questions? I'll hang on here for a few minutes. If you do have questions and you just don't want to say them out loud right now, then I'll hang on for a few extra minutes. You can also do it in the chat, or again, feel free to email me. Hopefully this was helpful to some regards. It takes time. You kind of just have to train your eye to understand what you're looking for. And then once you train your eye and you can see that there's something wrong, then it's the next step of figuring out, what do I do to fix it? And that's where all this starts to come in handy, and that's where your dancers can really benefit.
Well, I don't want to hog the time, but what exercises do you recommend? Or you know how dancers, they put their arms up but they let them droop, and you try to explain about the connection to the chest and the back. Is there exercises that you recommend for that? I mean, because they don't develop that lift because they just, hang their arm rather than doing the rotation and feeling it up under the back.
Yeah, so movement patterns that I recommend every single person in the world, to execute are some sort of squat pattern, some sort of hinge pattern at the hips. For dancers specifically, some sort of single leg movement, so like lunges or step ups or single leg RDLs, which is like a hinge type of movement. An overhead press, so a vertical press movement, a vertical pull movement, a horizontal pull movement, and a horizontal press movement. With all of those, you're pretty much touching every single part of the body. And it's those horizontal pull movements that are going to work the back and the lats that are going to help the dancer get some more awareness and strength to hold and support those arms.
That's inward, right? That would be the inward?
The pull would be like a rowing movement.
Oh,
so
rowing.
It's kind of like, yep.
Okay. Could you do, so you said squat, hinge, overhead press, and then could you just?
A vertical pull, so like some sort of chin up or like a pull down, a horizontal press and a horizontal pull. So like a push up movement and a pulling movement.
Do you recommend planks?
Sure, as long as they're done right.
Well, yeah. So they don't have one of those postural deviations while they're doing the plank, right?
Yeah, as long as you're not anterior tilted when you do it.
And side as well, side.
Totally.
And like reverse, like upside down.
Yep.
Now, I've seen information that says that kind of works the whole body, like different areas of the whole body. Like you said, you have to get them to do it correctly, but
yeah, and that's the biggest thing.
Pardon?
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing. It's just really making sure. A lot of times I will see either warm-ups or conditioning classes executed in dance studios, and the intention is by all means there, but the teacher might not be aware of what the movement pattern should look like. So therefore it's kind of pointless. So if you can start to train the eye, all the movements are great, they just have to be done properly. So if you start to train the eye of what to look for, what muscles we're looking for, what movement patterns we're looking for, then it's actually effective.
Yeah, I agree. Warming up and warming up correctly are two different ballparks. Completely.
Totally. And I actually have a presentation on that I recorded. I can send that over in the email as well, of different types, difference between the warm-ups and how to warm up. So I can do that one as well. And I plan on doing more of these. So throw out ideas in emails of what you'd like to see, and what you guys
that would be
struggle
wonderful.
with.
Yeah.
So,
I think that's kind of across the board, something that teachers of this era need to segue into, instead of using, I don't know, like old-fashioned warm-ups, which were from my era, but asking dancers to do the movements that are now in this era. They
Sure.
don't go together.
Yeah, you have to kind of, move with the times.
Yeah.
Awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Like I said, hopefully you got something out of it. enjoy your day. If you don't mind leaving a review or a comment on the either Dance with Utica page or Instagram, like I said, just so it's helpful. And have a great whatever day it is, Wednesday. Stay safe, everyone. Thank you for coming. Stay tuned.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good
That's
one.
great. Thank you.